So recently, I got a message from a young man who was asking me a question, and basically, what he was asking was the fact that he felt convinced that God was laying it on his heart to commit himself to a particular activity, and it was clear to him what he felt led to do with his life. But then his question was, how does he make a living out of it? Because from where he was standing, or from where he's standing at the moment, he doesn't see how that thing can sustain him financially and how he can survive doing that thing. And so he was saying, how do I commit myself to this thing that doesn't guarantee my survival logically? How? And so he was asking me what I think he should do, if I had any advice for him. And interestingly, if I had 100 naira for every time someone asked me that question, how do I survive on this thing that I feel very strongly to do, this thing that I have a passion to do, this thing that I have a conviction on my inside to do? How do I survive? How do I make money from it? I can't do it. If I had 100 naira for every time someone posed that puzzle to me, I would be a multi-millionaire by now. And I say this to let you know that it's a very common conundrum. It's a very common problem. It is what stops a lot of people from doing what they were made to do. It what stops a lot of people, this very, very complicated puzzle of, I don't see how this thing makes any financial or survival sense. It's what stops a lot of people from doing with their life what God designed for them to do. The issue of, how do I sustain myself doing this thing? And I've been studying the book of John. And one thing I like about the book of John, I think what I like the most about the book of John is how it ends. The book of John in the Bible, how it ends. It has 21 chapters. When you read John 21, Jesus had died, and the disciples were without Jesus. And it says, I think in verse 3, that one day Jesus Peter, who was the leader of the disciples, just said, I'm going to fish. I'm going back to fish. I'm going back to fishing. And he said, a lot of them said, we are going with you. We are going with you. Now, what this meant was, Peter was saying, man, we got to survive. I know that Jesus has called us to stop fishing for fish and start fishing for men, to focus on drawing men rather than going out to catch fish for our survival. That's what the ordinance Jesus gave them. From the moment he called Peter, he had told him, you are now going to fish for men, and you're going to drop this act of being a fisherman, catching actual fish. And, while they were with Jesus, Jesus supplied everything they needed per time. But when Jesus had gone, they didn't see Jesus. They began to get troubled. And so that day, Peter said he was going to go out and fish. And some other disciples followed him. And he said they went out to fish, and they fished all night, and they caught nothing. They caught absolutely nothing. And he said Jesus appeared to them. But they didn't know it was Jesus. He was unsure. And he asked them, have you caught anything? And they said no. And he told them to cast their net in a particular direction. And they did. And when they cast their net in that direction, they got a lot of fish. Now, this was very, they had a feeling of what they call it when something has happened before. I can't remember the word. But then they had this, it was like what happened in the first time they met Jesus, where he asked them to cast, he asked Peter to cast his net in a particular direction after they had caught nothing, and they caught something again, and this was happening again. It was deja vu. Yeah, the word deja vu, where they cast their net after catching nothing. He told them to cast in a particular direction, and then they caught a lot of fish. The Bible puts a number to it. It says 153 large fish they caught. And Peter knew at that point that was Jesus. And he said Peter had removed all his clothes to fish. That showed that he was really serious about going back to fishing. And he had removed all his clothes. So when he saw Jesus at the shore, giving them this direction, and they caught the fish, he put back his tunic and he went to meet Jesus to see him. And when he got there, he saw that Jesus had already prepared breakfast for them. There was already fish and bread for them to eat. And Jesus asked him, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "If you love me, feed my sheep." Jesus asked him this question 3 times and told him to go back to fishing for men. You see, whenever I read this, it makes me understand that whenever you set out to do what God leads you to do, there's always the question of how does this make survival sense? So if you're here listening today and you feel very strongly about something God is leading you to do, write a blog, record a podcast, start a YouTube channel, content creating, charity work, whatever it is, and you're seeing it as, how can I commit myself to doing this thing and at the same time survive, make enough income to take care of myself? I want you to know it didn't start with you. It has been an age-old puzzle, and it will be like that. And you see, for me, for those that follow this podcast, you realize that the name of the podcast has changed. I really haven't addressed that since I changed the name of the podcast. The podcast used to be called ProUp Masterclass, and now it's called the TA Podcast. I'm just going to kind of go into it a little bit about why I changed the podcast. You see, going into this year, a lot of things changed for me. I had to change the name of the podcast. I felt a strong leading to change the name of the podcast sometime in the middle of 2024. I had a number of reasons. One reason was because the name ProUp Masterclass wasn't very memorable. I had a challenge with that name. People had a problem remembering the name. So people always had a way of murdering the name. So we say ProUp, Pro Masterclass. And so I realized it was very hard for people to remember. If people can't remember it, it will be hard for them to find. And it wasn't always that way. For a while, people remembered ProUp Masterclass, but I realized that once something has expired, it has expired its use. And that's why it's very important for us to be spiritual. When the use has expired, it will not work in the way it used to work. So people used to remember ProUp Masterclass before. But then when ProUp Masterclass started to change, to be something where I talk a lot about spirituality, about clarity. I mean, initially I used to talk about design, and I used to talk about how to better position your design company and to be more professional as a designer. But when things changed, the name started becoming somewhat dysfunctional. It wasn't working well. Now people couldn't remember the name. A lot of people couldn't remember the name. And so I realized it had to change. And so that was the functional reason why the name had to change. Another functional reason why the name had to change was because I felt a strong leading to be more intimate with the podcast and to be very honest. I realized with ProUp Masterclass, when you call something a masterclass, then you already position yourself as an expert. So there's already a teacher-student dynamics, and I didn't want that. I felt it was time to be more vulnerable. It was time not to speak as a teacher, but to speak my experience as an individual. And so if people learn, they don't learn because I'm a teacher. They learn because I'm being honest, because I'm being vulnerable, and because I'm sharing rather than instructing. And so I really felt it was time to come open and to let people into areas of my life that I hadn't before. And I'd been doing that for some years now, just really trying to help people into areas of my life. When I started ProUp Masterclass, it was a very closed, the content was very formal. So there was always a veil. Nobody knew me better as Tola Alabi. And so I decided to change the name of the podcast to the TA Podcast, where I share my thoughts on issues, and to share my experience as much as possible, and to be as intimate as I can be, and to be very honest with people. I made up my mind that I realized that a lot of people are used to sharing testimonies after they've gotten the results. And I decided I would try to, as much as possible, to share mine during the trial. I think it's very important so that somebody going through the trial too can be encouraged, not by my results, but by my resolve to go through. And I think that's very important. I think we need to do that more rather than sharing results. Let's share the resolve before the result, because sometimes that's the encouragement someone out there needs. That if this person can resolve and share the process with me, then it encourages me to stay there rather than to expect what will happen. So I have to say that because today I'm going to be sharing with you what happened to me yesterday. So it wasn't last year or last month. You understand? I'm still in the process. I'm still trying to make sense of it. You see, this question of if I commit myself to something, how do I survive? Is something I battle with too. I would be lying to you if I say I have it all figured out. I seriously battle with it. I do. This year, I felt very strongly in my spirit to focus on the podcast. And when I mean focus, I mean focus. I mean to focus on the podcast, to make it my job, to make it my work. Showing up here every day, recording a podcast and putting it out there. I decided to make it the core of my life. The core. Because I truly believe it's what God has called me to do with this phase of my life. This phase of my life. There was a phase when God called me to be a designer. And this phase, God is calling me to be a podcaster, to share my experience, to talk with people, to advise people. And I said I was going to own it. Focus is a very important thing. A lot of people don't understand what it means to focus. The big sacrifice to focus is to leave all other things to follow one thing. And for me, this meant dropping of other things that I was doing that kind of were securing me financially. One of the things I had to drop last year was my mentoring club. I had a mentoring club that people used to enroll, and I, I it ran for 5 years, and I think October last year I had to shut it down. It was pretty hard shutting it down, because I'd come to a point where I'd started to build relationships with people in my mentoring club. It had grown. We were about 50 plus people there. And it was a paid mentoring club where people registered to join. And I used to have, private sessions with them. But then I felt a strong leading last year to close it down. It was a very strong leading from the beginning of the year, but I struggled with it. And as I said earlier, once something has expired, it will begin to have a counter effect. You understand? It will begin to become dysfunctional. And so I realized that the mentoring club started showing signs of dysfunctionality where the interaction wasn't focused. We would have sessions and people wouldn't ask questions. And it was I didn't have a grasp on it anymore. And it became some kind of monotonous routine. And so I knew I had to close it down, or else it will now become destructive. You understand? It will go from being dysfunctional to destructive. And so I had to obey and stop it and just close it down. So I closed it down. Another thing I had to close down was my logo design training course that I used to have, PMA. It was called ProUp Masterclass Academy. It was a paid logo design course where people would register. And I started it, I think, about 2-3 years ago. And it was good. It was a good source of income, But then after a while, I also felt that leading. This has to go. This has to be closed down. And it went from that stage to started becoming somewhat dysfunctional in terms of, the we started the first one I did had 20 something people register. But then the last one I did was I think about 6 or so people register. And I could see from the interactions, the engagement, the doing the activities. In the end, out of the 6 people, only about 2 or 3 people really followed. So it was becoming almost it was getting dysfunctional, and if I didn't stop it, it would have been destructive. So I had to stop that too. And the design business, I had to close that down too. So I had old clients reaching out to me saying, "Oh, I need to design a logo. Can you design a logo for me?" And I'd tell them no. And a lot of times I had to not just tell them no, but give the design work to someone else, which was a very painful thing to do. Because here I was trying to get finances. And here was this client, good paying client, telling me, "Oh, I have this thing." So I'd crossed that hump of convincing clients anymore about my rates. They knew my rates. So they didn't come arguing. They came ready to pay. But here I was saying, "I feel a strong leading to stop this thing." And I had to pass it over to someone else and say, I have the number of another designer. Are you ready to work with them? And I will pass them off. And sometimes, some of these designers, a lot of them, my mentees, would call me and say, "Oh, thank you very much. This person just paid me. Oh, this person just did this." And like, this person just paid you. But here I am trying to get money. I don't have money. You understand? It was very painful. It was very painful. I remember I had this client who works for a very big organization. And I told him, "I don't do this thing anymore." And he actually called me to his office and said, "Tola, do you know what you're saying? I've just been promoted. I'm now in a position where I need not argue with your rates anymore. I'm the one in charge of communications now. This is when you're going to get the reward of all the good work you've done for me. And now you're telling me you don't do this thing anymore. And I said, I don't do this thing anymore. And I said, I'll pass you on to this guy. I said, you want this guy to come and reap all the things that you sown? And that was one of the hardest experience for me when it comes to giving up. The hardest experience for me. Because then he was disappointed. He didn't understand, and he asked me, what are you going to be doing now? And I told him what I do. I said, I teach, I speak, I record. I said, I know, I see some of your stuff, but how is that going to take care of you? And I would never forget the look on his face. I said, all right, give me the guy's number because I need somebody. And now he has been working with him. And last time I saw this person, he said, man, Tola, you don't know what you're missing out. I'm working with this guy now, but you don't know what you're missing out on. It was very hard. It has been very hard. It really has been. But obedience is very important. So I decided this year to truly focus on the podcast. To focus on it. Let everything go and focus on this podcast. Focus on it to the point whereby I'm not even entertaining any online speaking engagement. Unless it's a physical engagement, I don't entertain any online talk at this webinar, talk at this. No. If every digital expression of me would be from this podcast. So it's putting all my cards, all my eggs in one basket. I'm all in. So that was the mentality going into this year. Trusting God. To be faithful. Now, I had this experience yesterday, which I want to share with you on the podcast today. For someone listening and thinking that it's easy for Tola to say he has it all worked out. He has it all worked out. Everything is cool with him. I'm going to be very vulnerable with you today and tell you what happened yesterday. See, yesterday evening, my wife told me she needed some things. So I had to go out and buy a couple of things. So I went out to do some shopping. And as I went out, I'd bought some things. I bought some eggs in a place and I was going out to buy something else. And as I got to this shop, I'd picked out what I wanted to buy. And then the shop attendant bought her POS machine. I wanted to pay with my card. So I gave her the card, put in my PIN, and then she said it was declined. Which was kind of odd to me. I said, declined? Yes, it was declined. And for those of you that listen to my podcast, I've said it before. I don't know. I don't know what's in the account. I don't know. I try not to follow that. You understand? I just try to focus and I don't look at it. So when she sent it, I said, okay, but then she took out the card and rubbed it against her clothes to see whether it was some dirt on the card and stuff. And she put it in again and she asked me to put in my PIN. And I put in my PIN, and this time I held it in my hand to see what the message was going to be. And for the first time in my life, it said decline. And right under it, it said insufficient funds. First time ever. And I sat down on that stool. And the world was spinning around me. Because I'd never experienced that before. I said it in a podcast before that there was a time I thought I was going to experience that, but someone sent me money. And I just thought, oh man, if I had spent this, that means I'd have been insufficient funds. So I looked at it, insufficient funds. Never seen it before. So I took out the card. And you see, I have a backup card. So we have two cards. One is the one we use, and one is the one we use in case there's no network. And so there isn't that much on the other one. But this was meant to be the main one that we use. And I used that and I was able to pay. And I went into the car with the items. And there was a barrage of emotions going through my head. And at the very fore of all this emotion was, I can't do this anymore. I felt a rush of anxiety. If there was anything like an anxiety attack, I felt a little bit of it yesterday in that car. I couldn't drive. I felt panic. And I said, no, I can't go on with this anymore. I can't do this anymore. God, I'm out of this deal. I ain't recording this thing anymore. Going out to do a real job. You understand? I'm going out to do a real job. I cannot do this anymore. You understand? So at that point, I was like, Peter, I didn't see Jesus anymore. For me, Jesus had died. Jesus had died. And I told myself, I'm going back to fishing. I'm going back to fish. Who's coming with me? You understand? That was me going back to fish. I said, I'm going back to fish, going back to dust up my laptop, start my PMA program again, do a flyer, get people to enroll, and get back to reality. Snap out of this fantasy. This is not how I take care of my family. This doesn't work. And so when I was able to get myself back again, I drove back home. And I was totally determined never to record a podcast again. This podcast wasn't meant to happen. Today's podcast wasn't meant to happen. It was meant to be, man, I'll do it when I can, but I'm closing this thing down. Insufficient funds. Jesus is dead. I don't see him anymore. I'm going back to fishing. I know he told me to fish for men, but now this doesn't make no sense. And this was about 5:30 when this happened. But for me, it was a very sobering, sad moment. I was so sad, and I was like, because for me, I know this is a calling. I know this helps people. I know the world needs this. I know this is what I've been doing in this phase of my life. So at that point, when I made that resolution, resolve that I ain't focusing on this no more. I knew something had died in me. But then I said, it's time to be responsible. Leave this thing alone. You understand? Leave this thing alone. Forget about all these people that say you are helping them. You need to help yourself right now. And so I went home and I just lay down on the bed. You understand? Just very defeated. I felt very defeated, and this doesn't make any sense. And here I was with this young man asking me a question about what to do. That question was still pending. I got that question like 2 days back, but then I thought about that question and I was going to pick up my phone and just I was never going to pick up my phone. I was not going to answer any question. You understand? I let this guy do whatever he wants to do, man. I need to take care of myself. I don't have time for this guy's question. You understand? I need to take care of myself. And so I felt so dejected and just started getting into strategy mode. Let's get this thing done. Which one do we pick up first? Do we start dusting up this logo design for clients? Do we start calling contacts again? Do we start the academy again and put it out there? 6 people is not so bad. It's not so bad. It's better than nothing. And then I picked up my phone. And then I got a WhatsApp message around 7 o'clock because I'd spent the last 1.5 hours just going through this whirlwind in my head, trying to make sense of things. And there was a young man that sent me a message around 7 o'clock. His name is Toby. I mention his name because it's very important. His name is Toby. Toby had reached out to me, I think about last year, but we reached out, had a short conversation, and that was it. I'm not even sure whether he invited me to speak to his community. I don't know what conversation, but it wasn't a conversation we had for long. But then he reached out to me here again, and the first thing he wrote was, "Sir, can you please send me your account details? I want to sow a little token." I kid you not, this what happened yesterday. So I'm still going through the motions myself. That's what he said. "I want to send you a little token." That shocked me because I had not knelt down to pray. No, I had not prayed. I had not said, "God, oh, this my account is showing insufficient funds. Oh, please come and..." No, I didn't do any of those. That's what I want you to know, that God cares. He knows your emotions. You see, when Peter said, "I'm going back to fish," he didn't pray, he just went back to fish. But here was Jesus already making breakfast for him. You see, I sent him my account details, and he sent me 10,000 naira. I'm being very honest, I'm being very open with you. 10,000 naira. Now, the reality is that doesn't solve my life's problem. But then it was enough to snap me out of my delusion and my lack of hope. I'm like, why did this guy, on this very day when I had resolved not to do this thing anymore, why did he ask for my account details at that time? Why? Because God sent him. Because God sent him. And Toby, if you are listening to this podcast today, I want to thank you for obeying that voice in your heart. I want to thank you. You said it was a little token, but it had tremendous impact on me. That's why I'm mentioning your name, so you don't think it's someone else I'm talking about. Tremendous impact on me. You practically saved this podcast. You did. You sponsored this podcast by doing this. Because I was actually going to stop. I was. And that's why I truly believe that obedience is the biggest resource in the world. The most powerful resource in the world is obedience to the leading of God. That thing in your heart to say, "Do this." It's what makes the world go round. Obedience. Disobedience is the most grievous vice in the world. Disobedience. When a lot of people ask me this question of how do I survive doing what God is sending me to do when it doesn't make any financial sense, you survive because somebody would be obedient. You survive because somebody is obedient. You die because somebody is disobedient. Disobedience always brings death. Death. There are people that should be doing incredible things that would change the world, that would change lives, that would turn things around, but they've stopped because of your disobedience. You're like, this thing I'm doing, does it make sense? It's not too small. And obedience doesn't have to be money. But that thing that you are told to do, you do not do it. It can be encouragement. Just sending a message out and just saying, thank you for doing this thing. It made so much sense to me. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. It makes so much sense to me. That's enough to save somebody. I remember talking to a young guy last week. His brother had referred him to me to talk to him because he had some issues with substance abuse and stuff like that. So they sent him to talk to me. So I spoke with this guy. I spoke with him for like 2 hours. It was an interesting conversation. Sometimes you've not had a conversation till you talk with somebody that has been to the depths. They have nothing to lose. They are so open. And to be honest, this guy sounded like he had one of the most spiritual experiences. I'm not joking. This guy had a substance abuse problem, but then he seems in the midst of that problem, he has come to know God more, and now he needs somebody to pull him out. But I had this conversation with him, and let me not lose track of this. Maybe one of these days I will talk about substance abuse, because that's a big problem we have in today's generation. But then he told me something. He said, "Sir, many times I've thought of ending it all, taking my own life. Sometimes I wake up depressed and I just want to slit my wrist." And he said, "I remember this day when I had this thought, and I had already decided. I was downstairs and I was going to go into the house and I'm going to slit my wrist in a bucket." And he said, one of my mom's employees, his mom is a businesswoman, told me, "Don't die today. Today is not the day when you die. You choose to live." And the guy walked away. And he didn't understand why that guy told him that. But he said, just hearing that alone, he changed his mind. That statement added one more day to his life. He didn't know what it was going to feel like the next evening, but for that day, he said he wasn't killing himself again. That guy chose to say those words. You see, the obedience to say what your mind has to say, instead of thinking, does it make sense? Does it have context? Does it have this? No. You don't know how far those words are going. The guy told me that day. He said that man, his mom's employee, just said, today, choose to live today. Today is not a day to die. Today is a day to live. He said that changed him. And he said that day he wouldn't die. That was the fish he needed for the day. For that day, it wasn't enough fish for the next day, but that was the fish he needed for today. Toby, if you're listening to this, you gave me the fish I needed yesterday. And that's allowing me to do this today. And I thank God for your obedience. It wasn't a small seed. It wasn't. It was an incredible boost. It was. Choose to be obedient. Toby taught me about obedience. Sometimes you're with someone, just tell them it will be okay. You don't know why you're saying that. They're smiling, you're laughing. They're laughing with you. Why should you tell them it's okay? But you feel a prompting in your heart. Just tell them everything will be fine. Tell them they are beautiful. Tell them, wow, you really have lost some weight. You've been thinking about it in your heart. You've been thinking about it, but you're saying, I'm not so close to this person. There's somebody I see this person, and I really realized that the person has lost a lot of weight. But then I think every time there's a prompting in my heart to say, tell this person that they've lost weight, that you're really impressed with how much weight they've lost. But then I always think to myself, oh God, how can I tell this person that I'm not too close? This person is a woman. They will start thinking I'm trying to hit on her, stuff like that. I shouldn't say this. But then it bugs me out every time. I leave the person and I don't say anything. But sometimes they need to hear it. You assume they know. But that might be what will save that person that night that thinks, I want to end it all. Because when they look in the mirror, the devil has disillusioned them so much, and they still see that overweight person. And they just need one person, you, that one person, to tell them what you see. How do you commit yourself to something that doesn't sustain you logically? You commit yourself to it through someone's obedience. Somebody needs to be obedient. A lot of good things have died because a lot of good people were not obedient. That leading in your heart, that inkling you have in your heart, follow it through. Somebody needs a random hug, give it to them. Somebody needs a phone call them. Don't think it's too small. Don't think it's awkward. It's telling you just read a blog, leave a comment. Leave a comment. You didn't even read it. I'm not even sure. Leave a comment. The other day, I read my sister's blog, and I was just going to close it and just tell her, oh, no, nice. Or just think it was nice. Not even tell her. But my spirit told me, leave a comment. I don't know what that comment meant to her, but my spirit told me to type those words. Leave a comment. Smile at someone. Smile. Just smile. Obedience. God is more in the small things than He is in the big things. He leads us through the small things. It's the small things that explode into the big things. That's why you realize that the center of every big thing, when you break it down, is one small thing. The cell is an atom. The small thing. That small thing has so much power. That's why when you split an atom, incredible energy comes out. Because the small things pack the most energy. So once again, I want to encourage you. The way is that God has put your survival, your sustenance in somebody's heart. Pray that the person will be obedient. And I was telling my wife this last week, I think one prayer we need to pray to God is not prayer, God prosper me, God do this. Is God, allow the person in whom you've put that seed of sustenance in their heart to be obedient today. That person that is going to be obedient to allow me to continue to do this thing that you want me to do, allow them to be obedient today. We need to start praying for obedience in the hearts of the people God is sending to us. Because God is sending a number of people to us. But the problem is disobedience. It's disobedience. It's what's destroying the world today. Obedience is what makes the world go round. Be obedient. So when people ask me this question, I don't know what to tell them. I don't know what to tell you. How do you commit yourself? You just do it. The question is, let somebody be obedient. So you need to be obedient. Because that thing that you need to commit yourself to, you've been battling with God for years. Saying, he can't sustain me. He can't sustain me. Do you know you are destroying someone else's life who has been waiting for your obedience? That blog you're meant to start writing and dedicating yourself to doing it. Somebody needs it. Somebody needs it. Their life has been terrible because you've not written that blog. This podcast that I've chosen to do every day, someone is thankful. Oh, thank you, Mr. Tola, for doing this thing. This is the highlight of my day. Thank you. My obedience is saving somebody's life. Somebody's obedience is saving my life. It's a cycle. That's how it works. That's how you commit yourself to what God is asking you to do. Because through the heart of somebody else, the obedience in someone else's heart, lies your sustenance, lies your hope. My name is Tola T.A. Alabi, and this is the TA Podcast.